Chapter 23. Crespi had listened to the doctor's story, fascinated, sickened, and finally in awe of Paul Church. A lesser man would not have survived, let alone flourished as Church had done. This man had lived among the loathsome breed, exploited and then killed them with little more than his own mind and bare hands. And now this accusation. It was almost too much for the fuzzy, exhausted mind to grasp. He stared at Church, thought about what he'd said, saw the clear, steady gaze, confident and certain. If he was lying, he was doing it very well. He looked to McGinnis, the woman he thought he knew. Her eyes were wide and frightened, pleading. She'd played it straight with him, hadn't she? The code slate had been the key to the hidden lab. She'd gotten him in, had been as shocked and horrified as he was. Except, did that make her innocent? There were holes in her story, perhaps. Holes in Church's too. But it all came down to who he believed, her word against his. If she had lied to him about how many crew fatalities there had been, and she could have lied about everything. And Mortensen, what had he been doing messing around with those suits? McGinnis said station's orders, but again, her word against Church's. He looked back at the doctor, considered what he knew so far. Church's biomake meant that he could easily kill both of them, probably without breathing hard. Why would he lie to see McGinnis arrested if he wanted her dead, or wanted them both dead? He had admitted to everything, admitted that his work was brutal, unappealing, even illegal. And yet he sought no approval, made no excuses for what he had done. But what about the alien in his Unity lab? Who else could have let it in? And, on the tail of that, how could McGinnis have known about the slate and not about the drone? Crespi closed his eyes, tormented by conflicting emotions, truth or lie, him or her. There could be no compromise. He searched for his instincts, and again he couldn't find them. He was tired, so very tired, wanted only for this to be over with, just to go lay down somewhere and sleep. I'm sorry, he whispered. The decision was made. McGinnis was furious at the accusation, furious and desperately afraid that Crespi would listen to Church. Why was he waiting? Why was he struggling with Church's lies? I'm sorry, Crespi whispered, and when he opened his eyes, he looked at her. Very sorry, McGinnis, but I'll have to... She backed away, felt her arm brush against the cool metal of the hatch behind her, glanced. It opened into a long, dim corridor. You monsters, she breathed, stunned tears of disbelief welling up. This can't be happening, it can't. She turned and ran. Crespi grabbed for her, but she was gone, footsteps clattering hollow down the smooth metal passage. McGinnis! He shot a look back at Church, saw the doctor move quickly to a circuit panel set in the wall. After her! I can control every door in the station from here. We can corner her in the pit. Crespi was already running, his own boots ringing down the corridor, echoing back to taunt him. Church was right. God, I've been such a fool. This was a bad dream happening too fast. He felt as if he'd boarded a runaway train, his car bulleting away from the sane, the rational, his intuition so muddled that he had to rely on guilty action to see him through. He reached the end of the passage, turned, saw a glimpse as she ducked around the corner, still running. There were several dull clangs as doors closed elsewhere, limiting her escape, sealing her in. Give it up, McGinnis! His shout reverberated throughout the hall, surely reached her, but still she ran. Another bend, another flash of flying movement ahead, but he was closer, gaining. His feet pounded, angry. Why did she have to lie? Why? How could I have been so blind? And he turned the corner, right on top of her. She let out a moan when she saw how close he'd come, leapt forward in a burst of anxious speed. He could hear her breathing now, hear her curses. Stupid, stupid! Her voice trailing behind her, turning another bend. He ran, ducked, and she was cornered, nowhere left to run, her back against the enclosure wall, her face openly terrified. "No!" she shouted, but she was looking behind him, back the way they'd come. Crespi turned as the door to the pen slammed down, the metallic sound quiet after the bounding echoes of the passageway. He turned back, sweating, pleased. She was caught. No way for her to get away. The look of pure panic across her features gave him pause. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, somehow hurt himself that she could think that, but she didn't seem to hear him at all. "He's got us," she whispered, and Crespi's heart suddenly pounded even harder than when he'd run, followed by a slow, horrible sinking in his gut. She looked up, and he followed her gaze, saw Paul Church step up to the railing above the kennel and call down to them. "You really should have listened to her, Crespi." Their captor smiled and folded his arms. Crespi fell back against the wall, his ears hammering with dull pulses of blood, felt angry and hurt and lost all at once. He'd made the wrong choice, and it was going to cost them.